Hi everyone, this week we are going to be continuing talking about digital citizenship, and this week specifically we are looking at student voice and roles in digital classroom spaces. Okay, so as far as our agenda for this video, we're going to quickly go over how can we acknowledge student voice in a digital space, and then what roles do students have in online spaces. Okay, and then we'll go over a little bit of housekeeping at the end, kind of looking at the week ahead. So to get started, how can we acknowledge student voice in digital space? So as we kind of get into this, we need to take a step back to kind of some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the semester. So early in the semester, we talked about like children today and kind of what kind of world they were born into. And really they're born into this world where there is ubiquity in terms of digital technology and media, right? It's everywhere. You can't avoid it really anymore. And that's kind of the norm probably going forward. And what we're seeing is because they're using it so much, they have a lot of skills just by the time they get to preschool. And then those skills continue to grow over and over as they get older. Now, also because they're using it so much for entertainment, communication, and other things, we really see that digital technology and media is really a central part of who they are, part of their identity, right? It's how they identify. Now, that's important to kind of set some context because a lot of times what we hear from older generations is that, you know what, kids these days aren't up to snuff, right? They aren't doing what they should be doing. There's no respect, whatever it might be. There's kind of this typical, like, they don't fit what the existing cultural norms are. And this isn't a new phenomenon, right? This has been around kind of since the dawn of time. I think older generations have always thought that younger generations didn't kind of live up to whatever the expectation that they had for them. And as a result, what we're seeing today is, as it relates to digital citizenship and interacting online, is that teens aren't really talking about how they're interacting online with their teachers, right? There's no conversation whatsoever really about that beyond the typical be safe on the internet talk. Right? We do that, but we don't do much more than that. And I think a lot of that comes from this idea that kids today are digital natives, right? But just because you're born into a world where we have a ton of access to digital technologies and you're using it more and you do have some technology skills, does not mean you have these superpowers where you know how to do everything related to technology. What it really means is that kids today are just more apt to take a risk than older generations have been in the past. A lot of times older generations are scared of breaking something. They have that actual real fear, where kids don't have that. They're not worried about trying something new. And that's what we see, right? So as we look at the digital citizenship curriculum that we typically see, the traditional approach, as far as interacting online, it's really, you shouldn't do it. And they try to control us, and or not control us, but control students to not actually get them interacting online or minimize that, especially while they're younger. And if you do, there's really one set of rules, and you shouldn't be doing it all that much. And when you do, it's, you got to follow X, Y, and Z. And what this really does is it's ignoring the fact that, teenagers, even some younger, like the tweens, they're using multiple different types of social media. They're on all these different types of online communities, and they're having to change between different kinds of norms with each community. And I think the easy way to think of this is like, you may use Instagram for one thing, Snapchat for another thing, and maybe Facebook or Twitter or something like that for another, right? And you can go between those really easily because you know kind of what's expected, and you've crafted those spaces to be about kind of this kind of thing, right? Maybe one's for interacting with family members, another one's with your friends, what have you, something like that. Kind of like for me, Twitter is more of a professional space, and then I use Facebook, Instagram as more personal spaces, okay? Now, as we think about, well, what's the participatory approach? It's really you create this classroom digital space, right? That was kind of what we learned about last week, right? We should be creating these spaces. That way we can model for our students and prepare them for interacting in these online environments. And as you do that, an important first step is you got to have some kind of norms for that space. And it shouldn't just be the teacher that sets those norms. And that should be kind of a general rule that you try to follow even in your face-to-face aspect of your classes, right? You should work with your students to kind of develop whatever those norms are for your classroom. Kind of think golden rule type stuff, right? Students should have a voice, and it's no different than it's no different than just doing it face to face. It should apply online as well, right? It shouldn't just be the adults setting the rules. So they advocate in our book, Matson advocates that we should really be setting these expectations for these classroom spaces, these digital spaces with our students, kind of help them understand how to do that, okay? And really they talk about three kind of key or major points that you should do. The first one is have an open class discussion about, well, what should we be doing in here? What's appropriate, what's not? That way everyone can come to agreement. You should have students kind of help you come up with how are we going to keep students accountable when we break these rules? right? Because if you're modeling it and they're learning these things often for some of the first times, there's going to be mistakes that are made. So what do we do when that happens, right? And you build that with them because there's more buy-in when you do that. And then over time, you want to reflect, right? You want to reflect to see, is what we're doing online, is it actually working? Okay, so those are just 3 simple ways to go about getting students kind of this voice in an online digital space in your classroom. Okay, and the idea is if we help them kind of understand what that means in one space, they can transfer that knowledge and skills and be able to more appropriately and positively interact in other spaces that are kind of outside of the school. Okay. Now, the other chapter we read for today was chapter 3, and this one was really all about, well, what role do students have in these online spaces? Okay, so as we look at a page in the book, I can't remember the page, but it's in chapter 3, they have this little table, little picture, and it's really defining what adult and teen roles are in digital citizenship curriculum. And you'll notice that the adults are the lighter color and the teens are the darker color. And when we look at the teens, it's really, they're either a victim or they're doing something wrong. Okay, and then as we look at the adults, they're either this predator, right, because that can happen, right, or they're this kind of protector, all-knowing, the person you report things to. So something bad happens, because that's all that can happen to teens according to this model. Only bad things can happen. You report it to the adult, and they will take care of it for you. Okay. Now, there are some issues with this kind of a approach to digital citizenship curriculum. And the first one is that it doesn't really create this positive role for students. Students can only do wrong, really, in this. They're either the victim, which isn't positive, obviously, or they're doing something wrong, right? They've made a mistake, they're hurting somebody in some way, which is not the reality when we look at how people use social media today, right? There's all kinds of positive ways that we can contribute to these communities. This also doesn't empower our students at all. It's really leaving all the power with the adults kind of in these spaces, which isn't actually realistic at all, because a lot of our spaces don't have any adults in them, especially when we think about kids, being on their own social media and interacting with their peers. Who's the adult in those spaces? This approach also focuses on limiting free speech, which we can't really do, right? There's limits about what we can and cannot, limit students from saying. So how are we modeling what's appropriate for these spaces? A lot of kids will post whatever's on their mind. So how do we help them kind of develop that conscience and that kind of understanding of what's appropriate, what's not? And then typically schools take a more reactive approach to these kind of things, where if it's not school related, well, the school's not going to be involved. And that's not really realistic either, because there are ways that we can be proactive where we're helping students along. And the way that we do that, again, is by modeling. Right? We want to model how do we have positive interactions in online digital spaces with our students, right? We want to do that for them. That way they can kind of develop this model in their mind, this mental model of, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, and then they can transfer that to a new situation, okay? And when we do that, we're really empowering everybody, okay? It's not that just the adults that have the power, but also the kids, so that they can solve some of their own problems. As you think about being a teacher and even being like a parent, like, I think about myself being a parent. I have 3 kids. I want them to grow up and be independent people that can, do what they need to do by themselves and not rely on other people. That's like how I'm defining success as a parent, right? Can they do that? And I think the same thing applies for teachers as well. We want our students to grow up and be able to do the things that we teach them. And that's what empowerment really is. Now, as we think about how we're modeling this for students, there's really 2 types of interactions we need to make sure that we help them understand, right? They can consume what's out there in our digital spaces, right? And when we think of consuming in a digital space, that's using the internet for information or entertainment, right? That's what we're talking about. So something's out there, something's been posted, we look at it, we interact with it, but we're not adding anything to it, okay? Now, if we add something to it, that's when you put your own voice out there, and that's when you're a contributor, okay? So that's the other role that students can have. Now, in our classroom digital spaces, what we should be striving to do is to kind of have this overlap. And when we have overlap, we have dialogue, right? Where we have students that are both contributing and consuming. And if you can create that and do it in a positive way, students kind of can figure out how to, they can interact with others in these digital spaces that aren't, part of the classroom, part of the school, okay? So that's what our readings were about for today out of the Matson book. There's also another reading that I want you to do. It's kind of more context about like what we're going through right now. I think it's good information about how you can move stuff online quickly. But if you have questions, you just need to let me know. Like always, we have email, you can contact me there. We have the discussion forum where you can ask me a question. And then I have the online office half hours on Tuesdays. So you can go ahead and get a hold of me that way. As far as housekeeping, so we have some readings. So we have Maths in chapters 2 and 3, and then that article At a Distance Quickly. Again, that At a Distance Quickly is just kind of a more informational, just give you some context. That content will probably be on the test at the end of the semester, but we're not doing a whole lot with it this week, but I wanted you to read it anyway. It's a quick, it'll take you 2 minutes to read. We have our second discussion. Like last week, it'll be, first post is defined what you need to do for that. That is due on April 1st, and then it ends on Sunday the 5th. And then as we look at the rest of the semester, we are going to be online, right? Made the decision earlier in the week, so I need to figure out what we're going to do online. So over the next week, I will get things figured out for the remainder of the semester. So next week in my video, I can tell you exactly what we're going to do, go over any kind of new assignments, things like that. That way you know what the expectation is moving forward. It's been definitely kind of a challenging time, just going week to week for a little bit here, but I'm hoping to bring some stability, at least a little bit more stability to what we're doing in class. That way you can kind of plan out. I think we have like 5 weeks of classes left, so you can kind of plan out where we are and where we're going. Okay, so that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions, need anything, you just need to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you online.